All right, welcome back to another episode of Divorce Well in Florida. My name is Matthew Waring, and I'm here today with my partner, Brian Dunmire. And together we are Fairway Law Group. We're a Florida divorce law firm. And today we're pleased to have a special guest on, Dr. Stephanie Renfrow. She is a pediatric neuropsychologist practicing out of Boca Raton, Florida, and Raleigh, North Carolina. You have to talk to us a little bit more about that. For the past 13 years, she has owned and operated a psychological practice specializing in diagnostic evaluation for children of all ages with various neurodevelopmental, behavioral, and psychological conditions and challenges. She has worked with families, schools, and other providers in identifying the needs of children at various developmental stages and while navigating a multitude of life circumstances. She is also a mother to a teen son and understands the joys and complications of parenthood, both professionally and personally. Today, we have her on to talk about child psychology issues in divorces. So with that, would you like to say hi? All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So, really, we wanted to bring you on because we wanted to get an expert's perspective regarding children and how they interpret parents getting divorced, how parents can talk to their children about getting divorced. That part, in my mind, I think is probably the hardest part of getting a divorce when you have minor kids is breaking the news to the children. How do you do that effectively with causing the least amount of harm possible?
Okay, so to address your concern as far as how do we break the news, so to speak, when you've decided, okay, we're doing this, we're going through with a divorce, now how do we address the children? Every situation is a little different. Ideally speaking, it would be both parents that address the topic with the children all together. It creates more of a unified front that you're all in this together as opposed to a broken system. You're all working together to create as much consistency and love moving forward and helps them feel as though they're supported through the process. So definitely together, making sure that they're aware that they are unconditionally loved and this is not something that's their fault. I think it's important to explicitly state that because even though the child may not have the verbal capacity to say that they feel like it could be their fault, just making sure that they're aware this is nothing that you've done to create this. This is a decision that we've made. And moving forward, try to keep it simple. Don't give too many details. I think that can be very overwhelming to the children. If you start laying out all the reasons and what it's going to look like in the future, all these things that you may or may not be able to stick to, definitely don't make promises that you're not certain of. So just keeping it very simple, fact-based, and also staying very calm yourself as a parent, keeping that unified front. They're all in this together.
To kind of follow up on that, so let's say that two parents are getting divorced, but they're getting along, and they're kind of the model where it's, hey, we don't get along, we're getting divorced, but our children are the number one priority. And that's what we're always hopeful for. Unfortunately, we don't always deal with that. But let's say that you break the news to your child, you and your wife, or you and your husband, your spouse, and you tell them the news and you kind of handle that conversation. Is there any sort of advice, like maybe specifically as to what the next kind of day would look like or what the next week would look like? Because obviously there's going to be some anxiety on both sides, but most importantly from the child. So maybe just kind of like that immediate period after informing the child of this tremendous change. Do you have any comments or advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think checking in with the children is definitely important. You don't drop the bomb and then just forget and see what happens. Checking in with them. And I would say for the younger children in particular, the more frequent check-ins are best. It's going to be a little bit more confusing for them. But I would say the next day, checking back in with them and saying, we had a conversation yesterday that I'm sure impacted you. So you're validating them and giving them that safe space to talk about it, and also staying calm yourself is a big part of all of this too. As a parent, it's easy to get emotionally activated during this time, so making sure that you're a grounding source, that you come to them and just checking in. We had a conversation yesterday that I'm sure was maybe surprising, or maybe if they got upset, it was upsetting for you. I just wanted to check in to see if you had any questions for me. Allowing the space for questions, I think, is really important too, because it gives the child the opportunity to kind of reflect on what's happening and the voice to be able to try to clarify things if needed.
Yeah. And how do some of their reactions kind of differ by age group?
I think it all starts with sadness, and then that turns into a fear of the unknown. And that's where it gets tricky because every kid manages fear a little differently. Every adult manages fear a little differently. So that fear can be expressed in a lot of different ways. It can be anxiety internalized. They could start to shut down, withdraw. You can see them disconnecting from their peers or disconnecting from school. Their grades might start to suffer, things like that. The other side of it is fear expressed outwardly. So it could be more acting out. It could be more this anger reaction that's externalized. So you just want to keep an eye on how they're adjusting to the grief. It's not just a grieving process, but it's complex. It's a complicated grieving process because it's mixed with all these emotions like confusion and things like that. We really have to be sensitive as a parent.
Yeah. And I mean, all children are different. There are a lot of couples out there that are staying married for the sake of the kids. And I think what a lot of parents would like to know is what age is ideal. It's never ideal. Ideal is not the best word. What is the least harmful age to get divorced? If there is something like that, if somebody's hanging on to their marriage for the sake of the kids, like what age should the kid reach before they think that it'll cause the least amount of harm to get a divorce?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. And I wish I had a clear answer for you on that question. It really depends on any developmental issues for the child, any psychiatric issues for the child, the dynamic, or is there other family members around that can help out with caretaking if they're little to create that consistency, that stability. There's so many factors at play. There's not a good age to get divorced. Some people say, okay, well, maybe we'll do it when they're younger. The younger, the better. But even as toddlers, they can experience a lot of stress with change. A toddler having to make those shifts. Then as a teenager, they're more astute to relationships and how relationships work and things like that. And then to have that severed can also be very impactful in terms of how they move forward in relationships. So any age is a tough age. It depends on the more situational factors. Again, if you have a situation where there won't be a lot of change in that situation, say if you have a stay-at-home mom and now you're getting divorced and now you have to work and now there's going to be a lot of change involved, maybe that's not a good time. Maybe you start to work a little bit first as a mom and then get the divorce later on. So this is not so much of an abrupt transition for the child. If you have family in town or maybe families moving to the area, maybe you wait till they move and so that the child has other family members around to create that family system. So the timing of it all is super important, but I would say it's not really based on age. It would be more relative to the circumstance.
I think that it would be foreseeable if you're telling your 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old that you and mommy are getting a divorce, there's going to be some reaction over the course of a month, a year, however long. Maybe not exactly what you're talking about, not doing as well in school, acting out, whatever it might be. Are there maybe not so obvious reactions that are common, whether it's maybe if they're a little bit younger, like potty training regressions or sleep issues, stuff like that? Could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. When they're younger, the regression is a big deal. There can be a lot of sleep and eating changes as well, overeating, undereating, insomnia, waking up a lot during the night, bedwetting when they're smaller. So there can definitely be a lot of those behavioral changes that can occur. When they get a little older, I especially see this in young girls around 8, 9, 10, they tend to start people pleasing and maybe acting perfect because they want to try to minimize any conflict that they may be seeing or create a sense of maybe if I can do this, I can fix it. A lot of children approach it as, let me try to be perfect or fine so that I can try to fix it, so that I'm not part of the problem and I can make it better. Sometimes that can be misperceived as, oh, they're doing fine. They're doing great, actually. They're adjusting so well. And meanwhile, mom and dad might be having some conflict, or one of them might be dealing with it in an unhealthy way or really grieving, but the child is fine. So that's great. So that's a misperception sometimes that they're doing better than they actually are. But in reality, it's a front that they put up as a way to deal with the anxiety that's more internal.
Yeah, and then do you think that some of those like compensatory things that they do to deal with the situation, do you think that that causes like long-term personality shifts in children that affect them as adults?
Yes, I think that's a good point because a lot of times when we go through development, personality development is part of development. Our physical development, our emotional development, our personality development is based on 50% nurture, 50% nature, nurture-nature debate. It's a complex interaction of both. So we have certain genotypes in which we're meant to develop from a genetic standpoint, and then we have our phenotype, our traits that are expressed based on our experiences and things like that. So there can definitely be some expression of certain genes that wouldn't have otherwise been expressed had we not had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the experience is a big part of our personality development. And part of personality is essentially a pattern of behavior. So how we deal with relationships, how we cope with stress, all those things are part of our personality a lot of times.
And then is there maybe kind of a two-part question here? Is there some sort of clinical standard for how long it might take a child to somewhat adapt to the two parents splitting up? And then the second part of the question is ultimately there's practically going to be two households. If somebody's getting a new house or apartment or whatever it is there any guidance that you have on whether or not we should try and keep the exact same routine or like set up the bedroom as close to the same as the other house? Or is it actually, no, we want it, maybe the routine the same, but like we want the bedroom to be a little bit different or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I would say the more familiar, the better. So keeping everything familiar is part of the consistency and part of the predictability. So keeping things as consistent and familiar as possible, even allowing them to take a favorite stuffed animal between homes. I'm a big component of that too. The grounding device is the way that they stay grounded amidst all these changes, right? There's certain ages, obviously, you want to start to wean from that. When they start to get older, carrying the stuffy and those sorts of things, probably not as healthy as they get older. But when they're younger, those little grounding devices are sometimes essential during that transitional period. But yes, keeping things consistent, familiar, I think is the way to go for sure. For the first part of your question, theoretically, everything's staying the same. Say the parents are being very good with trying to keep a consistent routine and all those factors are in place, amicable relationship. Typically speaking, about a year or two it takes for any typical child to try and hopefully successfully adjust to those changes in that circumstance. But if it's a situation where there's more conflict, there's not that stability, there's not that familiarity between homes and things like that, in a situation where, for example, there are certain genes that maybe get expressed a certain way, if we are predisposed to a gene that might be more volatile, say anxiety, depression, personality disorders, things like that. If we have a gene that's kind of in the waiting, so to speak, and then we have an experience that brings that gene out, those kids are going to have a harder time. And a lot of parents try to minimize a little bit and say, oh, well, kids are resilient, they'll be fine. I give them a year or two at most, they'll be fine. But in reality, a lot of kids have genotypes, not to get too scientific, that just aren't set up for adaptability. That's just the reality of it. So some kids are going to struggle more and longer, despite how much we try as parents. So we have to really keep an eye on that.
Divorces can occur in so many different ways and involve so many different issues. But do you think that divorce causes irreparable harm to children? Or do you think that parents have agency in reducing or preventing irreparable harm during the divorce process?
I definitely think that the way that parents handle it can either be a learning experience or it can be an irreparable damage sort of situation. It can be either one, but if there is damage that's caused, I think it can be repaired. And it's going to take a lot of effort and time as a journey to repair that. Again, a lot of factors involved in that, learning how to create that consistency after the fact, how to create that safe place after the fact, a place for healing. Say there was a couple of years where things were really volatile, maybe parents made some mistakes and things just weren't ideal at all. There was some damage during those years, so to speak. I do think that kids can recover from that, but it definitely takes a team approach. It takes a lot of space for healing. So therapy for parents and for the child, family therapy, being in an environment that is familiar and consistent, and keeping those things that maybe should have been done prior, putting those in place after the fact. It can be healing, and it can then be a learning experience.
Is there any scenario out there where therapy for the child would not be beneficial? We get this a lot where one parent will say, I think that our 4-year-old daughter should go talk to somebody about us getting a divorce or whatever. I'll pick on the husbands a little bit. The husbands will be like, my daughter doesn't need mental health treatment. We get that a fair amount. Without getting into the laws of the state of Florida, it doesn't exactly work that way. But just generally speaking, is there any scenario where mental health therapy maybe isn't appropriate at some point or something, or is it just would always be helpful?
No, I think it's always helpful. I don't think there would be a scenario where it would be hurtful. The only complicating factor sometimes can be if a parent is totally against the therapy and they start to badmouth the therapist or they badmouth the situation. That sort of situation can then taint the view for the child and make it less beneficial. But strictly therapeutic standpoint, I don't think it could ever really be harmful. You might find when the child starts entering therapy, there could be a time where the anxiety surfaces a little bit more because you're addressing that, depending on their age. You're kind of addressing maybe what they're trying to say if they're the type of child to try to stuff everything in and internalize, and then therapy kind of brings it to the surface. You might start seeing some different reactions in the child, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be just their way of them trying to resolve it. So no, I don't think on its face is never a bad thing.
Okay.
Do you think that maybe if co-parents were able to put aside their differences, this is like post-divorce, and even if they have to fake it, but if they can fake a collegial relationship when they're all together present with the child, do you think that that helps ease the transition? Because even if the child is thinking, look, my parents aren't together anymore, I'm being split between two households now, but maybe, I don't know, for an example, like on Halloween, both of the parents take the child trick-or-treating together and they just fake having a good time with each other to give the child some family unit experiences? Or do you think that that might confuse the child and blur the lines? Or is that a good thing to do, bad thing?
As far as faking it goes, it depends on how good they are at faking it,
Right.
because kids are very intuitive,
Yeah.
very intuitive. So they'll pick up on any sort of tension, any sort of slight, any sort of
Hmm.
sarcastic comment. Those little
Right.
things, they'll pick up on that. So if they're really good at faking it, I don't see the harm in that. But also, you have to communicate with the child so that they're not confused.
Okay.
Daddy's coming over. He really wants to go trick or treating with you. Keep it very kid
Yeah.
focused. He wants to come spend the day with you. He's going to come spend the day with you. We're going to have a great time. Really just communicating. But then dad's going to go back to his house.
Right.
And then you'll see him next week or whatever
Hmm.
the case is. So keeping the communication open, positive, kid focused, and simple. Again, you don't have to go into huge explanation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm also always curious about that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easier to do in theory than in practice, but
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about both parents should do it together and reaffirm that both parents love the child and that they're going to do everything that they can to try to keep things as consistent as possible. In the situations where you don't have two parents that are willing to work together like that, you have a lot of divorce situations. Somebody feels hurt and they just grab the kids and they leave. They go to mom's house, they take the kids, they don't let the kids see dad for months or mom for months at a time. How do you think that affects kids?
I think it creates a broken system in a way. The kids pick up on that brokenness. They understand there's something that's different and it feels less secure when things like that happen. But it does. I know it happens a lot where the parents aren't as unified and we just have to navigate that as it comes. But I do think there is a situation where the kids are going to suffer a bit more because there's more anxiety, there's less security, there's less predictability. It doesn't really create that feeling of emotional safety. It sounds like in that case, mom might be going through a lot. But how well is mom coping too? That's a big part of it too, or whoever they're with. Primarily, that also is a factor in that situation. It sounds like where that could be a real struggle for the parent too, and that can then bleed over to how the child is perceiving things or coping with things. So just extra attention during that time and extra care for mom or dad, whoever is the one that's the primary.
And then, unfortunately, we see this scenario more often than we would like, where you've got just two diametrically opposite parents. There's no stereotype. It's not always the female, it's not always the male, but we see the scenario where the mom has everything in order. She's responsible, takes great care of the kids, everything. And the dad's just a mess. Or there's no stereotypes. It also goes both directions, where we have the father who works his 9 to 5 job and adores being a father and is doing every single thing that he can, but maybe the mom has some severe mental health issues. And we've even had like extreme cases of that. And you've got these just two diametrically different parenting styles, households, eating habits, things like that. And we could sit here and say it shouldn't be that way, but it is, and it is what it is, and that's not going to change. So for the parent who is trying their best to be the best parent and pick up the slack. What kind of advice might you have for them? Do what they can for the 50% of the time that they're spending with their son or daughter, knowing that the next day this daughter's going back over to the other parent's house where she's sharing a room with the mom and it's dirty and she's going to eat chocolate for breakfast or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's a really tough situation. I think again, it's about communication, and sometimes it helps just having them understand that things are different in both households. So this is what happens here, and things are going to be different over at your mom or dad's. So keeping that understanding of knowing, okay, things are different in both houses, and not really assigning any wrong or right or blame per se. I think that's when we start to get down the rabbit hole of dysfunction, is when we start to tell the child, oh, that's wrong that mommy does that, or that's bad, that's neglectful. That is what you want to stay away from, and try to keep things very simple, clear, regimented, and a level of understanding, communication. That's the kind of thing you want to focus on, even though that sounds like a very damaging environment, having things be so inconsistent and possibly harmful, and that's heartbreaking as a parent. But it's a lot of work to keep yourself grounded as a parent, and just keeping the communication open, trying to create a sense of care and concern and consistency and love and all those things in your house. And that's all you can really control. You can't control what happens over there. So kind of reminding yourself, what level of control do I have? Adaptive control is in my house. And we understand things are different over at mommy's house. And how do you feel about that? You can ask them questions. How do you feel about that? Let them explore their thoughts and their feelings, and help them work through their feelings. Avoid blame or shame. Shame is probably the worst feeling on the totem pole. Shame creates a lot of really heaviness. So try to stay away from those sorts of things and just focus on the practical aspects and how you can be the best parent that you can be. I'm sure as lawyers, you guys tell them this all the time, but like keeping tabs on if the other parent is not doing their duties, and you have the evidence to support that. So in case you can get more custody in that situation, things like that down the road, you guys are the experts in that realm. But doing your due diligence as a parent to make sure that you can plan for how to create that consistency the best you can, even in the future.
Okay. In Florida, when you get divorced with minor kids, there's a presumption that 50-50 time sharing is in the best interests of the child. And that's a presumption that can be overcome, and somebody can get greater custody than 50%, but they have to meet a pretty high burden in order to get that. Path of least resistance for the legal system a lot of times is just splitting custody 50-50. Do you believe that 50-50 custody should be presumed as being in the best interest of the kids, or do you think it should be more of a case-by-case analysis?
I think it should be a case-by-case analysis, to be completely honest. I think the 50-50 is oftentimes that falls on the side of the best interest of the parents, because both parents want the kid. And I think if 50-50 becomes best interest of the parents more so than the best interest of the child, I think that's where it defaults to most of the time, unfortunately. I think looking at realistically what's best for the child, oftentimes we won't see that 50-50 split. It'll look differently. So I think keeping things kid-focused, what's best for them, and again, creating that familiarity, that consistency, that routine, that predictability, all that's super important. Sometimes 50-50 can be really disruptive to that. So whatever, but some cases maybe it works fine. So case by case. Yeah.
We get cases all the time, and obviously somebody is going to want a lot greater share of custody than 50-50 when they're getting divorced for obvious reasons. People want them full time. But we have to explain to people, if you want to fight for more than 50% custody, it's a long, difficult, and costly road. Basically, your whole case is that you have to prove that your other parent is unfit. So a lot of people don't want to go through all of that. So they end up settling on 50-50 custody. And hopefully both parents adapt and take on those roles responsibly. But then you also end up with situations like Brian just talked about, where the child's experience in each house is just so completely opposite. It's very confusing and disruptive for kids.
And that's where I think therapists and lawyers can work well together, as long as both parents agree for the child to be in therapy. The therapist can give a really unique perspective as far as what's best for the child's mental state. I had a client one time who was going through a divorce or had just gotten divorced, and their child had autism. Mm-hmm. And so predictability, routine, structure was even more imperative for this child because he was not typical. So that became an argument on her end because he really needs consistency and predictability. And so she was fighting for more custody because that was what was best for the child. It becomes more kid focused as opposed to parent focused. with regards to custody. And so I think that's how therapists and lawyers can work together, is finding out, is this a child who would benefit from having the same house every night or most nights, having the same breakfast every morning or most mornings. Like, those sorts of things are sometimes extremely important for children who have any sort of neurodevelopmental or psychiatric issue.
One more question, and then I think we want to shift and talk about what you do and your practice and stuff like that. Again, it shouldn't be this way, but just with the nature of our work, we do get a lot of times where one parent, hopefully it's not our client, but one parent is actively bad mouthing the other parent. And again, from a legal perspective, it creates a mess because it's hearsay and it's hard to prove. But nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. But we hear it all the time. Oh, my daughter said that daddy told her that, she's not a good parent, or whatever it is, right? A parent bad mouthing the other parent. Mm-hmm. How would you advise a mom or a dad to deal with that? Because the gut reaction is always going to be, well, your mom doesn't know what she's talking about, and I love you dearly, or whatever. But that is a toxic response, right? And so I think one thing we deal with clients all the time is, why am I always taking the high road when my spouse is able to not? From our perspective, it's, yeah, but this is about your kids. It's tough, but you got to do it. But it's still really tough sometimes. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, well, we're constantly teaching our kids by example, right? Or teaching our kids how to handle conflict and how to handle that opposition. So if something like that happens, I would just say, definitely not bad mouthing the other parent. Number one, don't bad mouth them for bad mouthing you. And don't get defensive, right? Because we don't want our child to be the defensive type or be the oppositional type, right? We want to find some sort of grounding where we can look at things from a wiser perspective than that. So I would say, as hard as it is as a parent, number one, forgive your ex. That, I think, is number one. And that's something you do privately. You sit with it and forgive them. You don't have to forget it, but I would say forgiving, because you want your child to be forgiving, right? That's something we want to instill in our children. And if we can't be it ourselves, we can't teach them how to be it. So teach them first that forgiveness is key. And you can say things like, no, well, that wasn't a very nice comment, but maybe daddy's going through a hard time right now. I think he said that because he's going through a hard time, and we can forgive him for saying that. It wasn't very nice. You can validate the fact that it wasn't a nice thing to say, but at the same time, always end on a positive note, end on forgiveness. And we're going to love him anyway. We're going to recognize, we're going to have empathy. He must be going through those sorts of things. It teaches them empathy, teaches them forgiveness, teaches them a positive resolve to conflict, even if you can't do anything about it. So that leaves them feeling good. Whereas if you get defensive or start bad mouthing the other parent, that's going to leave your kid feeling bad. So we always want to be mindful of how we leave our children.
So how are you practicing in both Boca and Raleigh? How does that work?
Well, I'm from North Carolina originally. I've been down here for like 20 years. During COVID, I opened up a practice up there because I had some spare time. Okay. Right. So it's a little different, where they have LPAs who they do a lot of the testing for me, and then I do a lot of the interpretation, the parent meetings, things like that. So I can be a little bit more hands-off, just given the way that North Carolina structures the psychology field. I'm very hands-on down here. So I'm primarily in Florida, like 3 weeks out of the month.
Okay. And are you doing like one-on-one therapy sessions with children, or is it like in the group context?
I've transitioned all the way into testing only. I'm a neuropsychologist. So neuropsychology is all about brain behavior relationships and measuring that. So I do a lot of psychological assessments, psychoeducational assessments, neuropsychological assessments. And essentially the purpose of those is to really uncover how their mind is developing from like a brain perspective, like cognition, processing, attention, reasoning, things like that. And then also from a psychiatric standpoint. So we're looking at, are they experiencing anxiety? And if so, how much? The assessments are very objective in that way. So we get a whole psychological profile of the child. And also if there's a situation where they're struggling in school, we look at, is there a learning deficit? Is there a processing issue? And this can be very helpful in times when there is some sort of circumstance that's creating a lot of stress, whether it's divorce or loss of a parent or something like that, where the grades start to slip. We start to say, okay, why are his grades all of a sudden declining? Is it something with the learning environment? Is it something with the home environment? Is it something that they're just struggling with emotionally, or they're checking out, or they're being defiant, or whatever the case is? A lot of times the question I have from parents is this a neurodevelopmental issue, like a learning disability or ADHD or something like that? Or is this the fact that I just got a divorce or the fact that they're being bullied at school or something like that? So that the assessments can help us objectively identify what's going on with them and then give the treatment options, which oftentimes is therapy I do work a lot of times with parents who are in conflict, sometimes still married, sometimes not. But the recommendations, I try to be sensitive to what's best for the child, right? So if we're seeing that their anxiety is just skyrocketed and it's creating these behavioral issues, and then, okay, what can we do as parents to help remedy that at home, between homes, that sort of thing?
So you could almost do, you and your spouse have come to the point where you need to get a divorce, but you haven't told the kids yet. You could theoretically do an assessment to get like a baseline, and then
Oh yeah,
and then you could
that would be a great idea.
then you could tell them about the divorce, right? And then later on, when they're coping with it, you could do another assessment and kind of see how they've changed versus the baseline to get an idea of how it
Yeah,
actually
I would
affected the kids.
check in about a year after the divorce
Yeah.
and see what it looks like then. Yeah, because that's when they should be technically resolving.
Okay, so you can get this assessment done, and then that'll kind of clue the parents in to how they might process the divorce, and then what the parents might need to really focus on in order to make the transition easier for them to avoid causing irreparable harm to the kids, because you kind of know, you got an idea of how they're going to react to it and how to go about it. Yeah, that's very
No,
useful.
absolutely. And you can predict like how they might cope with stress. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
it's very
And how are
interesting. It would be,
the assessments done? Is it dialogue with the child?
well, typically I speak with the parents first. So I would have a conversation with the parents to get more background information, developmental history, that sort of thing. Typically it's the mom that I speak to, whether they're married or divorced, but I often speak with the dads too. And sometimes the dads can join the call. It's up to how the dynamic works. But if they're divorced, I do like to get consent from the other parent. In Florida, it's a bit of a gray zone with psychology with regards to consent if they're divorced. But if they share legal rights and medical rights and medical decision making, then I get consent from the other parent as well. So we would discuss history, developmental history, that sort of thing. The child would then come in for testing. So these are all tests that are provided. There are different kinds of tests, so it varies, but it's one-on-one with me. For example, the IQ test can tell us a lot about their adaptability, right? And also personality features too. So if a child is average IQ and they're well-rounded within their intellectual demands, then chances are they're going to be pretty well-rounded as far as how they handle things, and they're not going to overthink too much like the really bright kids, and they're not going to be as confused like maybe the ones that are lower and require more structure and things like that. So getting their cognitive capacities measured is a good thing to figure out how adaptable they're going to be in situations that change. So all those tests are very one-on-one. It's a series of sub-tests. Some of them are for the IQ test blocks that they're putting together. I'm showing them, they're putting it together, asking some questions, but it's all creating scores that are then standardized and compared to their age level. So it's very scientific, but also a bit of an art and how we put it all together and make sense of it. The ones that are more personality, emotionally based, those are questions that they answer. It's like true or false types of questions, depending on their age. For the very young ones that aren't as emotionally mature yet, because they're little, then we do more projective things like drawings and stories and things like that. But it's all just a bunch of data collection that we're doing across, and trying to convert all of this into scores so that it becomes something that we can measure and something that we can use to apply to any sort of strategy or plan.
Very cool. How old
Which can be helpful in a situation where there's heightened emotions across the board. We can objectify.
How old does a child need to be in order to do some of these tests, like an IQ test, for example?
The IQ test starts at 3 years and 6 months. So it can be very, very young, at 3 years old. But typically speaking, to get a more well-rounded IQ, I usually start around like 4 or 5. And the 6-year-old version is even more advanced. So, but we can start at like 3.5 approximately. Okay. And the ones that are more psychological, like we're looking for signs of trauma, sometimes we can do that as well, like with the more projective emotional assessments. Those usually around the age of like 4 or 5, when they can start drawing pictures and start talking more, then we can get an idea of how they're processing things.
Okay, makes sense.
Maybe slightly off topic here, but would something like that be helpful for kind of just anybody who, let's say you have a 4 or 5-year-old kid and everything's good at the house, and maybe you just kind of want to make sure you're doing everything you can so your son or your daughter is just excelling in things that they can excel in, and that you're handling their emotions, and just you're trying to be like that really good parent and stuff like that outside the context of a divorce. Would something like this that you offer, would that be helpful for that?
Yeah, I think it could be helpful for everyone. However, from a professional standpoint, I'm not like ethically allowed to give it unless there is some sort of reason, it's like a clinical or educational reason for it. The assessments that we use are privileged material, so we can't just like giving it to anyone. But if there is a reason, like a clinical or educational reason, and sometimes it can be a great household and you just have that one child that's struggling. I see this with parents sometimes who really just put their all in and they seem to be doing everything right, so to speak, but the child is just having some issues. It helps us to determine, is there some sort of psychiatric or neurodevelopmental issue that's causing this to be expressed. Or sometimes it's something outside the home. Maybe they're being bullied. Nowadays, social media stuff. Maybe they've gotten in touch with the wrong person online. So it's these ways of just when you start to notice, and it doesn't have to be a major reason. It can be they're withdrawing more. I want to find out why. Their grades are slipping. I want to find out why. Those sorts of things just give us some sort of validation or justification for the testing process. And I think if you have any concern at all about your child or notice any sort of shift in behavior, then I think it would be beneficial.
Do you see children's attention spans getting shorter over time, over your practice due to technology? Is that something that you see?
Yes.
Dude, I was waiting to ask essentially that
Yeah.
exact question related to screen time. What have you seen over your course of
Oh
the
my
practice
gosh.
related to screen
Yes.
time with just these
Yeah.
tablets and phones and stuff? So,
Yeah, ADHD and autism, those have skyrocketed. I've been in practice for almost 15 years and I've seen such a skyrocket in ADHD and autism. But to answer your question, yes, we're essentially grooming our children to have short attention spans because everything comes at them so fast and so quick, and it's a dopamine rush every time, So we are essentially rewiring our children. And when I say we, I mean like society as a whole. But the way the world's working right now, there's so much happening at such a rapid pace and so many different things happening at once until it's really hard to like find your grounding. So a lot of anxiety as well. Anxiety is part of that, what I've noticed increasing over the years. Anxiety and short attention span, and also just very limited adaptability, which is part of the autism spectrum. So that's definitely something I think is going to take a while to shift, to find that grounding within themselves, where they can sit with boredom, or they can sit with some unpleasant feeling. They don't have to go seek the dopamine rush, or they don't have to seek that stimulation. They can sit there and just sit with themselves.
Yeah.
Kids are having a hard time doing.
Yeah. I mean, because it even affects adults. So I can only imagine, I think all collectively our attention spans are getting shorter, but specifically for kids, while their brains are developing, you got to imagine that it's got to be like 10x the amount of pressure.
Right. One way that we can try to remedy that as parents, or at least try to balance it or work against it, would be to get them engaged in something creative. When you're in that creative process, you have to go a little slower and you have to process things a little different. You have to draw upon your own psychological resources as opposed to just sucking everything in, like the games and things like that. You're having to develop an idea and develop something in a way that takes time. And it's a process to create something. And it kind of forces them to just go a little slower and figure it out and use their intellectual capacities and their creativity to really manifest something that they can be proud of.
and if somebody's listening to this podcast and wants to set up some sort of appointment with you or says, wow, that's really interesting, I would like to maybe talk to her about getting an evaluation done for my child or something. Two questions. Number one, how would they go about doing that? And then number two, going back to what you're talking about in Florida, whether you can only perform these tests if there's like an indication. Are you able to make the indication, or does that need to come from like a primary care doctor or
They can call me and say, look, this is the situation. This is what I would like to accomplish with the testing. And then we can go from there as far as if there is some sort of need that we can identify for the testing.
Right.
Excellent. And picking up through our talk this morning is that, you're saying that to ease the transition of a divorce for children, kind of the buzzwords I keep hearing are stability, consistency, reaffirming love and care, and cooperating with the other parent. And it seems to me like the common denominator is how the parents' mental well-being, because if the parents are having a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, then that's going to be passed along to the kids. So maybe the big takeaway is for the parents to work on themselves, because the work that the parents are going to put into their own mental health is going to help. It's going to pass down directly to how the kids experience the divorce. So, the focus ultimately is on the kids' mental health, but But by having the focus on the parent's mental health, it's going to ultimately create a better outcome for the children.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to create space for our children. And if our mental space is taken up by all these other things, the resentment towards the ex or the stress of the court hearing coming up, or all these, our mental space is already taken.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, it was Dr. Stephanie Renfrow, and she's out of Boca Raton and Raleigh, North Carolina. And just tell me one more time, what was the name of your practice?
It's SRS Psychology Incorporated, but you'll find me on Google and everywhere under my name, Dr. Stephanie Renfrow.
Excellent.
And so they can find me on my website, childpsychologyboca.com. In Raleigh, it's RSR Learning Group. So it's rsrraleigh.com for up there. And they can also reach me via phone, which is on my website as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a very good talk. We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.